What is poppin' YouTube? Doing my running back must start, must sit in the tier format so that you guys know who to start, who to sit. Hit a like button, leave a comment on your start sit question, and subscribe if you haven't already. The first player in our S tier is going to be CMC. Of course, rest of the season is CMC unless something dramatically different was to occur. Going up against Philadelphia Eagles now. The 49ers are projected to win this game. It is going to be a defensive battle with the 49ers and Eagles defense, but I much prefer CMC going up against the Eagles defense than I do DeAndre Swift going up against the 49ers defense. So we got CMC. 4.8 fantasy points in full PPR is what he's been averaging this year. Absolute league winner on TMC. In our A tier, we have Bijan, we have Etienne, we have Gibbs, and we have Eckler. Starting off with Bijan. Shout out to Bijan for making it all the way to our RB2 this week. We're excited for the way that he's being used in this Atlanta Falcons offense later on in the season. 14.4 fantasy points is what he's been averaging, going up against the Jets. But the volume that we have been seeing with Bijan, yes, as much as we know that the Jets defense has been very good, I love the volume that we're seeing for Bijan. Absolute league winner heading down the stretch. That's what we were talking about earlier on in the season. Yes, has it been a roller coaster of emotions with Bijan? It has. But we have Bijan here leading us off as the RB2. Our RB3 is going to be Etienne. Facing Cincinnati, it's a great matchup, especially without Joe Burrow leading the helm for the Bengals. 17.4 fantasy points is what Etienne has been averaging in full PPR. So we like Etienne this week. Of course, last week got a little bit nicked up, wasn't able to have his full performance, but looks like he's going to be fully healthy for this week. So we do like some Etienne here. Next player in this tier is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs versus New Orleans. Yes. Am I putting Jahmyr Gibbs over Austin Eckler here in the tier? I am. 17.3 fantasy points per game is what Jahmyr Gibbs has been averaging. Just like we are really excited for Bijan Robinson as this rookie running back coming on late, so we like some Jahmyr Gibbs. He's obviously overtaken David Montgomery in this backfield as the 1A. Yes. Is David Montgomery getting those touchdowns? A little bit of a pain in the butt for us Gibbs owners. Yes. But we do have Jahmyr Gibbs here. And then rounding out this A tier, we have Austin Eckler, who's going up against the New England Patriots. New England's trying to tank. They will let the Chargers score as many points as they want. And with 15.6 fantasy points, what Austin Eckler has been averaging, we do like Austin Eckler here in the A tier. Has it been as amazing as some past seasons? No, it hasn't, but still a top 5 option for me this week. Then moving on to our B tier, we have Alvin Kamara, Kyren Williams after that amazing game he just had this last week, Rachaad White, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, and Breece Hall. Starting it off with Alvin Kamara going up against Detroit. 19.9 fantasy points is what Alvin Kamara has been averaging in full PPR. In full PPR, Alvin Kamara has been an absolute cheat code, but I just have him here leading off the B tier. You could have made an argument that he should be in the A tier. I just thought there was too many guys if I were to include Alvin Kamara, so I have Alvin Kamara here, right here as my RB6 a week, like this for him going up against Detroit. Then we move on to Kyren Williams, who's going up against the Cleveland Browns defense. As much as that seems scary, the Rams fed Kyren Williams. You won your week last week if you got Kyren Williams, and he's still looking like the league winner that you picked him up off of waivers to be. 18.5 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in full PPR. Starting Kyren Williams with confidence. You could probably debate that maybe I should have Kyren Williams in my A tier. I just think the matchup versus the Browns, as much as it's a great matchup and the Rams are going to win, this defense for the Browns, they are still very good. So I'm a little bit more worried about Kyren Williams compared to some of the guys ahead of him. Then we got Rachaad White here, next guy in our tier versus Carolina. Carolina is clearly in for the tank. Frank Wright got fired, so I think they're going to win this one pretty handily. 15 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in PPR. A little bit Calvin Kamara light is what Rachaad White's been all season. Then we move to DeAndre Swift versus San Francisco. We don't love it as much for DeAndre Swift. Of course, that we do for CMC. But with this offense, you never know if DeAndre Swift is going to get a touchdown. I think that's the upside. He hasn't necessarily had amazing games the last 2 weeks, so this is a little bit less of a matchup compared to last week where we had him ranked. But 14.5 fantasy points is what he's been averaging. Have DeAndre Swift here. Then we move to our next guy in this tier, and it's going to be Tony Pollard. 13.9 fantasy points in full PPR versus Seattle. We love the matchup versus Seattle. We hate the fact that Tony Pollard, it just hasn't been the best season for Tony Pollard. But I think down the stretch, I still have Tony Pollard, like we said, as a top 12 running back rest of the season. So we do like Tony Pollard here as our RB10. And then moving on to our RB11, we have Breece Hall. Breece Hall is going up against the Atlanta Falcons. And like we said, Aaron Rodgers is going to be coming off of IR in the next few weeks. So it could be getting better for Breece Hall. But it hasn't. This quarterback play has been absolutely abysmal for the New York Jets, because I think, honestly, it's not for a lack of Breece Hall being less talented than any of these guys ahead of him. I mean, I think Breece Hall on a given week should be a top 5 running back. It's just this offense sucks so bad that Breece Hall is here as our RB11. Moving on to our C tier, we have Zach Moss, David Montgomery, Isaiah Pacheco, Devon, Raheem, Derrick Henry. Starting it off in this tier, and we have Zach Moss. Shout out to Zach Moss if you held on to him, you didn't drop him, because clearly with Jonathan Taylor going to be out for the next 2 to 3 weeks, Zach Moss is about to emerge with what he was doing before with his 85% snap share, 90% snap share, where he was a top 5 RB on a points per game basis. So we like Zach Moss versus Tennessee. We don't love the matchup, but we do like Zach Moss going to be getting things rolling again. Then we got David Montgomery versus New Orleans. 17 fantasy points per game is what he's been averaging. It's kind of been touching on a bust here the last few weeks for David Montgomery. I know he had 20 fantasy points this last week, so you might be saying to me, Caleb, why are you putting Jahmyr Gibbs so far ahead of David David Montgomery, it's because Jahmyr Gibbs is starting to get pretty much everything. It's been pretty much just David Montgomery on the goal line. Otherwise, boom, it's Jahmyr Gibbs. And that's the part that worries me a little bit more about David Montgomery. You're still going to be starting him as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2, but David Montgomery, have him here as our RB13. Then we move on to Isaiah Pacheco in this Kansas City backfield. 13.9 fantasy points is what he's been averaging this season. Isaiah, it just stinks. It just really stinks with Isaiah Pacheco because we want to put him higher, but we also know how this Kansas City Chiefs offense, I mean, outside of Pacheco and Kelsey, they've been really lacking options. I know Rashee Rice has been stepping up, but we just don't know what type of game is going to emerge here versus the Green Bay Packers. They should get ahead early, which means probably they should be running the ball in the second half, which bodes well for Isaiah Pacheco. I just could not push Isaiah Pacheco any higher in my ranking. Next is going to be the Miami backfield. Just like we were having the Lions backfield a few weeks ago, where I really couldn't figure out who to rank higher in my rankings. We got Devon and we got Raheem Mostert. And Devon, if he plays, I feel like you're going to be having to start him just based on the upside. But 20.6 fantasy points is what Devon's been averaging. Raheem's been averaging 18.4. Are both of them going to take a little bit of a hit? Yes, because it's not just one. But we have them both here in the C tier because if you have one of them, if you have both of them, you're probably starting both of them. So we do like the Miami Dolphins here. Then we got Derrick Henry versus Indianapolis Colts. It's an in-division game. Derrick Henry, as we're coming down the stretch, has a very great fantasy football playoff schedule, which we'll be talking about later in our rest of season rankings. But right here as RB17, 13.8 fantasy points is what he's been averaging this season. It hasn't been great, hasn't been amazing, but he has started to turn it on here the last few weeks. Starting off in our D tier, we have Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, Javonte Williams, and Ramondre Stevenson. Starting it off here with Joe Mixon versus Jacksonville, 13.5 fantasy points. This Bengals offense, I'll be honest, it looked better than what I thought last week with Browning. I'm not saying it was great, but I think if they can start to get these receivers, if they can continue to get Jamar Chase, at least throw the ball for 10 to 15 yards, that's going to bode pretty well for Joe Mixon because he's going to continue to be a high volume play with this offense. Now, they're going to get down, so we're going to have to help for some dump offs for Joe Mixon, but that's why I have him here leading off the D tier. I just think the volume that he's going to get compared to these other guys is where I have him. Then we move on to our next guy in this tier, and it's going to be Kenneth Walker. Yes, Kenneth Walker is still doubtful for this week. Dallas, it's a great matchup. 13.8 fantasy points is what Kenneth Walker's been averaging. We've seen the snap share that Zach Charbonnet has got. As much as I absolutely love Zach Charbonnet and where I think he's going to be heading, rest of the season, even into next season, Kenneth Walker is still the more explosive running back and the back that I want to own in this backfield. So hopefully Kenneth Walker could be healthy. Have him ranking here because, of course, I'm recording this on Wednesday. We don't know what's going to happen, Thursday, Friday, as we get more updates, but have Kenneth Walker here. Next guy on our list is going to be Javonte versus Houston. Not a great matchup for the Denver Broncos as they go in and face some CJ Stroud and this electric Houston Texans offense. But Javonte, he's been getting more snap share. He's been looking more healthy each and every week. 10.7 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in full PPR, which isn't great, but we do like the matchup enough to be starting Javonte. I like what we've seen the last few weeks. And then rounding out this year is going to be Ramondre. The Patriots are in. The tank is in. And Ramondre Stevenson is just going to have to play a part of it. 13 fantasy points. There's been absolutely zero quarterback play to help him out, to get those rushing lanes opened up with even a play action pass because it's pretty much just commit to the run. Hope Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi makes a mistake throwing the ball. And so for me, have Ramondre Stevenson at the end of this tier. It hasn't been a great season at all, but still have him in our D tier. Then moving on to our E tier, we have a few guys. We have Brian Robinson, Devin Singletary, Jerome Ford, James Conner, and then the two Steelers backs. Starting off with Brian Robinson, 14.2 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in full PPR, going up against the Miami Dolphins. The reason that I do not like Brian Robinson this week is they're going to have to throw the ball in the second half, and enough of the throwing the ball in the second half is meaning probably less touches for Brian Robinson, which then it kind of becomes touchdown or bust, and I just don't like banking on touchdown or bust on my players. So have him here in our A tier, still leading it off. Then we move to Devin Singletary versus Denver. We do like Devin Singletary quite a bit. We thought he was a Jag heading into the season, just another guy. He's quickly proven that he is not just a Jag. He is a very decent NFL running back. Going up against Denver, great matchup. Think that the Texans will be up in the second half, so they'll be able to run Devin Singletary a little bit more. Then we move on to Jerome Ford versus the Los Angeles Rams. Jerome Ford, he's had some pretty big runs. It hasn't been great. It hasn't been great with the quarterback play, but Jerome Ford has looked good. So 12.4 fantasy points is where I then have Jerome Ford. Then we move on to James Conner versus Pittsburgh. I just think this is your arch nemesis. James Conner hasn't looked great coming back from injury. The volume hasn't necessarily been to the efficiency that we were hoping that it would be going to play against his old team. I think James Conner will be a little bit more motivated. 10.3 fantasy points is what he's been averaging in full PPR. And then rounding out the E tier, we have the two running backs for the Steelers. Just like I couldn't really rank the Dolphins running backs together, I'm just throwing these guys together. Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. For a while there, we thought Jaylen Warren was really overcoming Najee Harris, but the last 2 weeks, Najee Harris has had pretty decent days. So it's hard for me to tell you on a week-to-week basis who to take because Jaylen Warren is really controlling the rushing. Najee Harris is getting the touchdown upside. I'll say this. You're probably starting either one of them just based on the running back landscape, but I have Jaylen Warren ahead of Najee Harris, so let me know down below if you would take Jaylen Warren over Najee Harris if you had to make that hard decision this week. But I appreciate you guys so much tuning in to my running back tier rankings, my running back must start, must sit. We'll be putting out my wide receiver rankings tomorrow. We will also be going live here tonight on Wednesday night, so make sure you tune into that as well, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.